Hi, welcome. My name is Jane Yu. I am the owner and co founder of UNS Events, and I am a wedding planner helping engaged couples plan and design their wedding day from beginning to end. I love supporting my couples on their planning journey by providing step by step guidance, and I really try to keep their stress to a minimum and their enjoyment to a maximum. Planning a wedding is one thing, and we went over a little bit of that in some of my last live, but paying for it is a whole other ball game and whole other topic that we need to discuss. I'm glad you're here today because we are going to be discussing developing a budget and just understanding the nuances of it as you're planning for it, because there's a lot of insight that you might just not be aware of because this is most likely your first time planning a wedding. I chose this topic because after how do I plan a wedding, the next most answered or asked question is probably how much does a wedding cost? And to be honest, this is kind of a loaded question and really hard to answer, uh, just with one sentence or even just one idea. And so I've been doing a lot of research and just observations on social media, on different various platforms to see what couples are talking about out there. And I noticed that people are pretty surprised when it comes to finding out how much a wedding costs. But I do want to kind of set up your frame of mind before we even start developing the budget. So I'm really glad that you're here today. I understand that spending tens of thousands of dollars or even a few $1,000s seems like a lot on just one day, but think about all the time and effort that goes into planning and all the people that you're inviting. It kind of starts to make sense if you look at it that way. I have planned weddings that are $35,000 or supported couples who are planning $35,000 weddings, as well as quarter of a million and up. And the budget conversation, even though the numbers aren't the same, the budget conversations are somewhat similar in the context and guidance that I give. So, first thing I want to talk about is just some things for you to keep in mind as you're planning, just to avoid all these surprises along the way, because I've been seeing a lot of that. And I think the first thing is there's really no one size fits all for budgeting, just as in there's no one kind of approach for planning your wedding or what kind of wedding you want. There's no one size fits all for budgeting either. So, you really have to decide what you're comfortable spending with you and your partner and go from there. There's also so many different approaches to planning a wedding and budgeting for a wedding. So all of these different approaches are going to cost different things and different amounts. So that's something you just have to keep in mind. There's really no right or wrong answer here. It's really what's going to be important to you and your partner. And as you figure out those priorities, I think the numbers will also all start to make sense and it'll be easier for you to make decisions along the way. The second thing to keep in mind is you'll likely find somebody in you likely will be able to find someone in the budget that you are aiming for, but also remember that you do get what you pay for most of the time. You might find that hidden gem, someone who's just starting out, who's amazing at what they do already, and you might get lucky on that front. But a lot of times you get what you pay for. And a lot of times, less money does mean less experience. And more money usually means more experience, but that's also something that you want to be careful of because just because they cost more doesn't mean they're better. So it is really on you too, as the couple, to really vet the vendors and make sure you feel them out to make sure they're the right fit for you, regardless of kind of what they cost. I want you to be also realistic about your expectations. For example, think of it like if you want a Goyard bag, but you have a Zara budget, like that's not really going to work. So I think you have to approach wedding planning in the same way. For instance, if you really want a nice, really nice dinner with a lot of decorations and things like that, you just have to think about what a nice dinner kind of costs, right? I'm in Los Angeles, one of the most expensive places probably to get married. But if I were to go out with my husband to a dinner at Bestia, let's say, one of my favorite restaurants in LA, it's a really nice dinner, and we have some dinner and drinks. We spend maybe up to an hour and a half there, and that's going to cost us usually at least around $300. And we had a really good dinner, but we only had a few drinks. If we're at a wedding, we'll probably have more than that. And it's a much longer time. And you have to think about all the staffing and people and time and service that goes into it. So that's just one way to think about it, just to think about what things cost. So if you want that same kind of experience at a wedding, then you have to budget at least that just for food and drinks. The next thing I want you to think about is a lot of times parents and families do help couples out. I know not every family looks the same. Not everyone can have the same expectations, but if you do expect that anyone will be contributing, I definitely would talk to them in advance so that you can see what you might have, and then you can figure out how much of your own money you want to put in, or if you just want to stick to whatever they're contributing, if it's going to be enough. And then that way you can plan a little bit more ahead rather than waiting for them to give you a gift. If it's been brought up, that's great. Then you can approach them. If they haven't brought it up, I think it's fair. A lot of parents will expect their children to come to them when they get engaged to see if they might be able to help pay for the wedding. But of course, you want to keep that conversation really open and honest. Don't want to burden or pressure anybody on both sides. So just keep that line of communication open and just understand what their expectations are too. If they are giving you money or if they're paying for the whole thing, just make sure that you are also considerate of them in the planning as well. Ideally, you don't want to go into debt paying for your wedding. I think a lot of couples, I forget what the exact percentage is, but I did read a couple of reports by the Lending Tree, which is an online lending company for personal and business loans, and also the Knot. A lot of couples do go into debt, and a lot of it is because they do feel pressured to have a certain type of wedding, either for their family or for their friends or whatnot. And of course, you do want everyone to have a really, really good time and have a great guest experience. But I don't know that you want to go into your new marriage with all of this debt from the wedding when financial um, stresses and just financial commitments and just general financial health is going to be probably a big conversation in your marriage. So that's just something to think about. And if you do decide to take on some debt, I would try to do it in a way that's responsible. So maybe you have a plan to pay it off, or you borrow from family, or you just have a plan so as not to set you back so much, and you still make decisions based on that. But the pressure of social media and content, I feel like has really um, like kind of put a strain on people to be able to deliver and have the best wedding possible. And on another note, you also don't have to get married right away or have a wedding right away. Maybe you got engaged, but you don't think you'll be able to afford a wedding until 3 years later. I think that's totally fine. I just did see a wedding planner post about it, and I thought it was really smart of them to say that, because you can still get married on paper if that's really important to you and that's what you want to do. And then you can have a bigger wedding when you've had time to save up for it or whatnot. Everyone's circumstances are different. And so there's no huge rush to have the wedding. It can be celebrated in many, many different ways. So I just want you to make sure you don't put too much pressure on yourself. You're not too hard on yourself just to have a wedding for the sake of having a wedding. So, some tips from me to kind of develop your budget. I think the biggest one is that it all starts with your venue. So, not all venues are created equal, meaning some venues, like a hotel or restaurant, they'll come with food and beverage built into the packages, usually comes with tables and chairs and staff to set up and everything. So when you get a proposal for them from them, it'll include all of that usually. But let's say you go to an event space that's a completely raw event space, doesn't come with any tables and chairs or anything. You have to bring in everything, rentals, catering, etc. And there are some venues more for corporate that you even have to bring in ACs, things like that. But a lot of wedding spaces, some of them don't come with anything. So that means you have to bring in everything. So when you're searching for the venue, I think you have to be realistic about what you want to spend. And if it's just the venue that comes with it and it doesn't come with food or beverage or anything, then I would highly recommend that you do your due diligence to figure out what caterer and rental company you might want to use, because you kind of want to see what all of that costs. The infrastructure of a wedding, let's just say, would include for me the venue, all the food and beverage, including alcohol, and everything that you need for the wedding, like tables, chairs, linens, dishes, flatware, glassware, all of the things that you definitely need for the people and the guests should take up no more than 50 to 60% at the very max. 50 is ideal, but sometimes that gets really hard. And then you might also have to just pull back on some of the other vendors. But I would definitely, if you're going more than 60, then you're definitely going to go over your budget. So if you have a $50,000 budget, I would recommend sticking to $25,000 to $30,000 for all of the things that I mentioned. And another tip that I have is you want to be transparent with vendors. I know a lot of vendors don't have their pricing on their website, and that can get frustrating because you just want to know what people cost. But if you tell them what you have up front, or even if it's a range, maybe you tell them the lower end. And then even if they're a little bit more, they can tell you they can work with your pricing, or you're open to getting on a call rather than you having to get the package, review the package, see that they're out of budget, and then move on. I feel like just even saving a little bit of that time, or you mentioning that up front, will be a little bit, you'll feel a little bit more like you're in control. So I think that would be really, really helpful if you just tell vendors like what you have. I know some people might be a little bit, what's the word, wary of doing that if you feel like you're quoting something that they're gonna like their package is lower than what you're quoting or asking for. But most vendors, I mean, at least for us, like we are forthcoming and tell them what our pricing is anyway. And we are actually thinking about putting pricing on our website now. So just as we're establishing the business more, because we know what we want to charge. But if pricing is very important to you, then I would just make sure that you find vendors that have pricing online. We are on the Knot on weddingpro.com, and we are a vendor that advertises on there, and they require you to put pricing now. So if you go on the Knot to look for vendors, they should have pricing up there. A lot of them do have it, and so I would definitely look there to see, because they do list their package pricing, or we are required to now. My last tip for right now is I would create your budget based on your maximum guest count. So if you think you're going to have somewhere between 130 to 150, then I would go for 150. And then later, if you only get 130 RSVPs, then you kind of get that money for on your budget, 20 people. If it was like $200 a person, you get, what's the math? $4,000 back, either as savings, or you can put it towards something else that you needed room for, right? And so I think you just have to, budget for the max amount of people, and then you'll likely get a little bit less, but you don't want to be surprised the other way around. You don't want to budget for 130 and more people RSVP than you thought. So I would definitely budget for the max amount of people that you think will be there. But the only call out here is if you do that and then you contract with the venue that provides F&B. Some venues or caterers, they don't allow you to reduce the guest count by much. So let's say you contract for 100 people, a lot of them will only have 10% attrition allowed. So let's say only 80 people come, you're still going to be on the hook to pay for 90 people. So if budget is definitely a concern and you're trying to definitely make every dollar go far, then I would definitely suggest just making sure you know what the attrition is. And some caterers, they say you can confirm the guest count just 2 weeks to a month before anyway. So it doesn't really matter as long as you have that date locked in. So I would just make sure to find that out. So I hope that was helpful. I know I gave a lot of tips, and there's just so much more that I feel like I could talk about, but I could go on and on and on about budgets and figuring out like vendors and all of that stuff. But there's definitely going to be more to come in the future. I am going to be doing a live next week about vendor research and just how to keep that process kind of tight, because I know a lot of people, that's like where their main frustration is, and they feel like they're wasting a lot of time. So hopefully that kind of helps shape your budget development as well. I did want to end and see if anyone has questions, and I'm not sure if anyone has questions, so I did prepare a few kind of frequently asked questions about budgeting. And I think one of them is, what do people tend to forget about when developing their budget? So obviously there's obvious things like venue, food and beverage, staffing, etc., photographer, florist. Like these are all things that I feel like most people will be able to think of for a standard wedding. But I think some hidden costs, or not hidden, things that you tend to forget about are printing costs, like for all the day of paper or even invitations. You kind of forget and you kind of tend to leave that out. It's not a huge cost, but every dollar adds up. So that's something that I would say. Anything that you have to purchase or borrow or rent, even like card boxes and just little like decor pieces and things like that, I feel like that gets left off the budget. Gratuities is another one. I think gratuities is actually, most of it is discretionary. That's what I tell my couples. Of course, we're always of the school of thought that if it's like, if you do have the room to give gratuities to your vendors, it's of course a lovely, lovely gesture. But most of it is discretionary, and there are of course other ways to show appreciation. But if you do want to give, this is something that you do want to account for. A lot of caterers already include the service charge and gratuity in the contract. So make sure to ask them if it's already in there. Also, sometimes it's not expected. Sometimes they don't expect it because they pay their staff a great living wage. And so it's really just discretionary. So I would just ask your vendors, hey, what's your policy about gratuities? Do your staff expect it? Because you do want to just be mindful of that, and especially if you do feel like you're going to want to give. Another thing that people tend to forget about is the standard wedding is about 6 hours long. If you do want to go longer, that's going to incur additional costs with staffing, with the bar. DJs can charge extra for DJing for longer. So I think that's just something to think about. If let's say you want to do the after party at the venue as well, then you want to account for those costs that come after those 6 hours. The second question that I was thinking about is, what's the easiest way to cut down on your budget and or reduce costs? And for me, I would say guest count, like cutting your guest count for sure. I've also seen a lot of posts and people talking about if they've already gotten married, like what would they have changed? A lot of people do talk about how they would have been a little bit more mindful of their guest list, like especially if they had a bigger wedding, like they would have really thought a little bit more about who they really wanted there, and also thinking about who they would really be in touch with like 10 years from their wedding kind of thing. And I understand weddings are really fun when there's a lot of people there, and of course like during the time you get married, you want the friends that you love to be there at that time. But honestly, reducing the guest list is going to be the easiest way to cut down on your budget, especially if you're really trying to be budget conscious. And then the last question that I was thinking about is, what is something that you don't really want to be scrappy about? And that you might, I mean, of course, there's different ranges, but I think you really want to feel good about your photographer, like photos. A lot of my clients opt out for video, but photos, obviously, everybody has. And that's like the one kind of thing that's really left from your wedding day for you to look back on, to remember in 10, 20, 30 years. If you have kids and grandkids, like that's something you can show them and pass down. And so I think photography, again, there's like such a wide range of photographers in terms of pricing, but there's a lot of really, really great established photographers that I feel like have pretty decent pricing, especially for the content that they deliver to you. So that's something that I would definitely do your due diligence on, is vetting all the pricing, comparing how people are, and then also making sure you feel good about them in terms of the vibe. Another thing that I wouldn't be too scrappy about, I just want to make sure you feel good about, is a coordinator. Of course, not everyone has the budget to get a full planner or have a full planner, but at the very, very least, I always recommend having a coordinator to help you the last couple of months leading up to your wedding, because it's really going to make or break your stress, I feel like. And I think you want to make sure that it's not just a fiscal decision too, because I have had couples come back to me who didn't hire me at the time, and they didn't end up having a great experience with their coordinator. So um, when it came time to refer their friends, they ended up actually calling me because they felt that they could trust me and my expertise. So I think you do have to feel out how experienced the person is, what they're willing to deliver. And you can get a lot by just asking certain questions. And perhaps I can save that for a live another time, about how to find the right coordinator and planner for you. But anyway, that's the end of my life. And I hope this gave you some insight about budgeting for your wedding. I know it wasn't a lot of how to's per se, but more about setting up your mindset, the frame of your mind as you go into it, because I think just dealing with wedding planning is so much. So if you're just hitting the ground running without any context or setting up the framework for things like the budget and the planning, it's just going to add to the stress that you're already going to feel. So I hope this was helpful. And as I mentioned, I am going to be doing a live next week about researching vendors and just some tips and tricks when it comes to doing that. So I hope I'll see you there next Wednesday at 4:30 PT. Bye.